I have told this story 3 times, to the review board, to the compact liaison, and once to a colleague who asked why I still carry a field kit on transits I'm not assigned to cover. She stopped asking questions halfway through. I'll tell it once more. The Corvath Dunn was a Veskari transit hauler, mid-size, running a colony resupply lane between the Thena way station and the Kethavar outer settlements. I was on it as dead weight, a field medic finishing my 2nd rotation, hitching a leg on a manifest waiver because the direct shuttle had a 3-week wait, and I had 6 days left on my contract window. I had a bunk in the crew-adjacent passage, a field kit that hadn't been restocked since Thena, and a beacon on my belt that I had tested that morning out of habit. Green light, full charge. I remember that detail specifically because it is the last time I saw it. The structural failure happened at 06:14, ship time. I was not on the crew deck. I was in the lower cargo passage running a diagnostic on a Veskari child's pressure cuff. Her guardian had flagged a calibration error the night prior, and I had offered to check it before the morning handover. The passage was narrow. When the port side cradle gave way, the section folded inward and I went down with it. I was conscious throughout. That was not entirely a comfort. I took the fall on my left side. 2 ribs, I guessed, possibly 3. The sharp-edged kind of pain that tells you the damage is done and will bill you later. My left arm was pinned under a cross strut that had come down at an angle, not crushing but wedged. I could feel my fingers. I could not move the arm. My beacon was on my left hip. I twisted enough to check it. The casing had taken the corner of the strut directly. The outer face was split, and the status light was dark. I cycled the manual reset twice. Nothing. I lay still for a moment and did the arithmetic. The crew would run immediate structural triage on the upper decks. The manifest would account for me eventually, but eventually was not a useful unit of time when the passage around me was still settling. I could hear the groan of metal finding its new geometry in the dark. Then I heard something else. It was a low, thin sound, not mechanical, biological, coming from roughly 2 meters to my right, past a fallen ceiling panel that had landed at an angle and made a kind of lean-to in the debris. I knew that sound. Veskari juveniles have a specific distress register, a narrow-range pulse below normal conversational frequency. I had read about it in the species brief during my Thena orientation. I had not expected to hear it like this. I called out, softly, in what I remembered of the Veskari contact phrase, a short tonal sequence meaning roughly, "I am not a threat, I am present." My pronunciation was almost certainly poor, but the sound shifted, not stopping but changing slightly. Acknowledging. I worked my right arm free and found my field kit still clipped to my right side. The seal was intact. I got the kit open by feel and touch, running my fingers over the contents the way I had learned to in low-light field certification. Probes first, then the clamps, then the wire spools at the bottom. I had done that inventory so many times I could have done it underwater. The child had crawled partly out from behind the ceiling panel by the time I got the kit open. I could see her in the thin light coming through a fracture in the outer hull above us. A seam of pale morning light, real and cold and welcome. She was young, maybe 4 cycles by the size of her, with the pearl gray skin and the wide, flat pupils of her species. One foreleg was held awkwardly. Not broken, wrong angle for a fracture. More likely a deep bruise or a joint slip. She was not in immediate danger. But she was alone in a collapsed section of a ship she could not navigate. Here is what I knew about Veskari children that mattered in that moment. Their spatial orientation is resonance-based, not visual. From before birth, each individual is imprinted with a specific narrow-band copper frequency pulse, their resonance signature, which their family unit and any rescue team can track across significant distances, precise enough to locate a child within 2 meters. It is the mechanism their culture uses for every kind of finding: the young, the injured, the lost. No other technology required, only the copper frequency transmitter woven into the wristband every Veskari child wears from the first year of life. Hers was gone. The wristband was torn, the clasp broken, the band itself missing, probably lost in the fall. I looked at my ruined beacon. The transmit loop in an emergency beacon is a copper strand coil, standard specification, because copper is the most reliable conductor for low-frequency burst signals across most atmospheres in this sector. The loop in mine was 2 meters of fine-gauge stranded copper wire, insulated, coiled behind the shattered face. I could see one end of it where the casing had split. I got my wire stripper from the kit. Field medics in deep transit postings learn to fix things because there is no one else, and I had restocked that particular tool 3 times in 2 years. I worked the copper strand out carefully, keeping it intact. 2 meters. Fine gauge, stranded, 7 filaments twisted together, which is what you want for flexibility. I stripped the insulation from about 40 centimeters of it, twisted the bare filaments back into a single braid, and looped it twice around my own left wrist first, to check the diameter. Then I adjusted it for the child's smaller wrist, and tied it with a basic surgeon's knot, the only knot I trust to hold under stress without slipping. The frequency calibration was the part I could not be certain of. I knew, from the Thena species brief, that Veskari juvenile resonance signatures sit between 340 and 380 kHz, with individual variation within that band. I knew that the rescue team scanning equipment aboard a Veskari vessel is calibrated to sweep the full juvenile range when a child is reported missing. I did not know this child's specific signature frequency. No one outside her family unit would. What I could do was set the loop to transmit on the broadest possible signal within that band. A copper strand coil of this gauge, at this diameter, tied with this tension, will pulse at a natural resonance frequency when it receives any ambient electromagnetic interference, and there was plenty of that in a ship that had just folded its port cradle. I was not making a tuned transmitter, I was making a bell, and I was putting it in a place where her people would be listening for bells. I tied it around her left wrist. She went still when I touched her. Veskari children are trained from early to allow human contact in medical contexts. The species had been in the compact for 40 years, and the cross-species medical protocols were well established. She held her forelegs steady while I checked the joint, and she watched me with those wide, flat pupils while I wrapped the copper loop around her wrist and checked the knot. Then she made a sound I had not heard before, not the distress register, something lower, slower. I did not have a word for it. I sat back against the debris and waited. The crew of the Corvath Dun ran their structural triage in order of decks. They got to the lower cargo passage at 0841, 2 hours and 27 minutes after the collapse. By that time I had set my own ribs as well as a person can set their own ribs with a field kit and a great deal of focused breathing, and the child had fallen asleep with her wristband hand resting on my knee. The Veskari resonance team found her at 0722. They came through the debris from a direction I would not have predicted, through a section of the hull I had assessed as fully compromised, which they apparently had not considered a serious obstacle. There were 3 of them. They moved through the wreckage with a fast, low efficiency that was difficult to watch. The eldest, I assumed eldest from the way the other 2 positioned themselves, crouched beside the child and ran a small scanning device over the copper wristband. Then she looked at me. I did not speak. There was nothing useful to say. I had done what I could see to do, and she had been found. The team got the child out first. Then they came back for me. One of them, not the eldest, the youngest of the 3, who moved like someone who had spent a great deal of time in confined spaces, removed my beacon from my belt and turned it over in her hands. She looked at the stripped copper coil, at the child asleep now in the eldest's arms, and then at me again. I said, in the limited Veskari tonal I had, "I am present, I am not a threat." She made a sound that I am told, later, was the Veskari phrase for, "We see you." The copper wristband was logged as evidence in the structural incident report. After the investigation closed, the Veskari crew chief submitted a request to the Compact Cultural Archive to retain it as a resonance artifact of record, the first human-fabricated object ever assigned a Veskari resonance signature. The request was granted. It is catalogued under the child's family resonance signature, with a secondary note in the archive's annotation field. The annotation reads, "Human, field medical, copper strand, manual calibration, broadband sweep, sufficient." Sufficient. I have carried a field kit on every transit since.